From locker shoves to love notes, how my bully became my boyfriend. If you had told me back in high school that the boy who shoved me into lockers, stole my homework, and mocked me in front of everyone would one day hold my hand and whisper that he loved me, I would have laughed in your face, or maybe cried, depending on the day. Because back then, being the target of his cruelty felt like the loneliest thing in the world. His name was Jason. He was the kind of guy everyone seemed to orbit around without question. Star athlete, messy brown hair that somehow always looked perfect, and a grin that could charm even the teachers into giving him a pass. But to me, that grin was usually followed by some cutting remark, some reminder that I didn't belong. I was the quiet kid, the one who liked books more than parties, who sketched in notebooks instead of joining pep rallies, who didn't talk much because I was always afraid my voice would give something away, something I wasn't ready for the world to know. And Jason, whether he knew it or not, seemed determined to make sure I never forgot how different I was. It started small comments about my clothes, snide remarks about how I walked. Then came the shoves in the hallway, the snickering with his friends when I passed by, the sudden silence that fell when I entered the locker room, followed by the sound of his laughter echoing in my ears. The strange part was, sometimes it felt like there was something behind his eyes, something that didn't quite match the cruelty spilling out of his mouth. But I dismissed it because what else could I do? When someone makes your life hell, you don't go searching for hidden meaning in their smirk. You just try to survive. I survived by shrinking myself down, by becoming smaller and smaller until maybe he wouldn't notice me anymore. Except he always did. The turning point came one late afternoon during junior year. I had stayed behind to help stack chairs after an assembly. Most of the gym was already empty, but the echo of footsteps behind me made me freeze. I turned, and of course it was Jason. "Hey, Fairy," he called, his voice bouncing off the bleachers. "What are you doing here all alone? Waiting for Prince Charming?" My throat went dry. I told myself not to respond, not to give him the satisfaction. But my hands trembled as I kept stacking chairs. And then, for reasons I'll never understand, I snapped. "Do you ever get tired?" I asked without looking at him. He stopped. "What?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Do you ever get tired of being a jerk all the time? Doesn't it get exhausting?" The silence that followed was so heavy, I almost wished I could snatch the words back. When I finally looked up, his expression wasn't the smug grin I expected. For just a second, it was something else, confusion, maybe even guilt. But then it vanished, and he smirked again. "Wow, guess the fairy can talk after all." He walked away, but something about the look in his eyes stayed with me. After that day, things began to shift. Subtly at first. The comments didn't come as often. The shoves became less frequent. Sometimes, I caught him staring at me across the cafeteria, and when I met his gaze, he'd look away quickly, as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to believe he was changing, but another part whispered not to be so naive. People don't just stop being cruel. But then came the note. It was slipped into my locker between classes, folded into a messy square. First, I thought it was another prank. My stomach twisted as I opened it, expecting some insults scrawled in Sharpie. Instead, the words stopped me cold. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you can't breathe unless you're alone? J." I read it over and over, my fingers trembling. Jason. It had to be him. No one else signed with just an initial like that. I shoved it into my pocket before anyone could see. For the rest of the day, it burned like a secret against my leg. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the note until sleep refused to come. I thought about how his eyes had looked that day in the gym, how his laughter sometimes sounded forced, how, despite everything, a small, traitorous part of me had always wondered if there was more to him than the cruelty he showed me. And now, with this note, it was like a crack had formed in the wall between us. The next day, another note appeared. This time, "I don't know why I do the things I do. I don't know how to stop. But I see you, and I think maybe you understand what it feels like to hide." My breath caught. He was talking to me. Not at me, not about me. To me. It went on like this for weeks. Notes slipped into my locker, words scrawled on lined paper that felt heavier than any textbook I carried. He never said much in person, but in those notes, he was someone else entirely, vulnerable, raw, aching in ways I understood all too well. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Who would believe me if I said the boy who bullied me was also the boy pouring his heart out to me in secret? And maybe, if I'm being honest, I didn't want to share him with anyone. Those notes felt like mine, like a secret doorway only I had the key to. The first time I wrote back, my hand shook so badly the pen nearly slipped. I know what it feels like to hide. I've been doing it my whole life. I didn't sign my name. I didn't have to. When he found my note, I watched from a distance as he pulled it from his locker. For a moment, his usual mask slipped, and a smile tugged at his lips, soft, almost disbelieving. It was the first time I realized that maybe, just maybe, Jason's cruelty had never been about me at all. From that day on, it became a conversation written in secret. Notes tucked into lockers, folded beneath textbooks left in the library, slipped into the pages of novels I left in the lost, and found for him to discover. It was a strange kind of intimacy, words on paper instead of whispers in the dark. And those words, they changed everything. He wrote about pressure, about how being the golden boy of the school felt like carrying weights tied to his chest, about how the guys on the team expected him to laugh the loudest, to push the hardest, to be the one who set the tone, about how sometimes he'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would still cheer for him if they knew who he really was. He didn't say exactly what that meant at first. He just hinted shadows between the lines. But I understood. Maybe because I'd been living in those shadows too. I wrote back with truths I'd never spoken aloud to anyone. How every morning I rehearsed the way I walked, the way I spoke, just to avoid confirming their suspicions. How I buried pieces of myself so deep, sometimes I wondered if I'd ever find them again. How loneliness became such a normal part of me, I mistook it for safety. Somehow, telling him all of that felt less terrifying than saying it to a friend, or even to myself in the mirror. Maybe because, in those notes, he was someone who saw me differently, not as the boy he mocked, but as someone who carried the same secret weight. One afternoon, weeks into this secret correspondence, he left me a note that was different. Do you ever think about what it would be like if we didn't have to hide? I sat with that question for days. It rattled inside me, scraped at the walls I'd built to keep myself safe. I thought about it in class, at lunch, on the walk home. And the terrifying thing was, I had thought about it. Not with anyone, not really. But in fleeting, impossible daydreams where I wasn't afraid to just be. And now, here was Jason of all people, asking me the same thing. I wrote back, all the time. But I don't know if it will ever happen for people like us. The next day, he didn't put a note in my locker. Instead, he was waiting by it. When I saw him standing there, leaning against the cool metal, my chest locked up. He didn't look like the cocky, confident guy everyone else saw. He looked nervous. His hands were stuffed deep into his jacket pockets, and when he saw me, he didn't smirk. He just nodded slightly, almost like he was asking for permission to speak. "Can we talk?" he muttered. The hallway buzzed around us, kids rushing past to their next classes. My instinct screamed to run, to avoid whatever trap he was setting. But something in his eyes, something that looked almost scared, kept me rooted. We walked outside, around to the back of the school where no one usually went. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, and the world felt too quiet for what was happening. He didn't look at me at first. He stared at the ground, kicking at a loose stone with his sneaker. "I wrote those notes," he finally said. His voice was rough, like it hurt to push the words out. "I didn't know if you'd actually write back." "I knew it was you," I whispered. That made him glance up, startled. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the air buzzing with something unspoken. Then he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know how to do this. I don't even know what I'm saying. But I don't hate you. I never did. He broke off, jaw tightening. "You made me feel things I didn't want to feel. And it scared the hell out of me." My heart thudded so loud I was sure he could hear it. He kept talking, words spilling like they'd been dammed up for too long. "Every time I saw you, it was like I couldn't look away. And the more I noticed you, the more I hated myself for it. So I tried to make it go away. I thought if I made you miserable, maybe I'd stop feeling whatever this is. He finally met my gaze again, and there was no cruelty in it. Just raw honesty. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. This was the boy who had made my life hell, standing here confessing that the reason behind all of it was the same thing that lived inside of me. The same secret. And for the first time, I didn't feel so alone. But if I thought that was the moment everything would magically change, I was wrong. Because a secret shared between two people is still a secret. And in high school, secrets like ours were dangerous. We kept writing notes. We kept meeting in quiet corners, speaking in hushed tones. We were careful, so careful, but even then, nothing stays hidden forever. The first crack came one Friday night at a football game. Jason had just made a play that had the crowd roaring. I was in the bleachers, trying not to look at him, trying not to feel too much. But when he glanced up into the stands, for just a second, his eyes landed on me. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't the way a guy looks at his classmate. It was softer. It was more. And someone else noticed. It happened so fast, I didn't even register it at first. I was still sitting there in the bleachers, notebook in my lap, pretending to sketch when really I was just trying to keep my hands busy, so I wouldn't stare at Jason too long. The cheerleaders were chanting. The crowd was roaring. And for that one fleeting second, his eyes found mine. Felt like the whole stadium disappeared. Just him and me. Like the look he gave me was another secret note passed in broad daylight. But the thing about secrets is, the moment they slip into the open, someone will always notice. Later, in the buzzing chatter of the stands, I heard it. "Why's Jason looking over here?" a voice said behind me. He kept staring at him. I froze. My whole body went rigid. A ripple of laughter followed. "No way, Jason, staring at that kid? You're trippin'." I didn't turn around. I just stared at the field, praying the earth would swallow me. But the seed was planted. The next Monday, whispers followed me down the hallway. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. The subtle tilt of heads, the way conversations dipped when I passed, the sudden laughter that felt pointed even if I couldn't hear the words. And then there was Jason. He wasn't looking at me anymore. Not in class. Not at lunch. Not on the field. It was like he'd shut some invisible door, locked it tight, and thrown away the key. The notes stopped. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd built it all up in my head. The secret glances, the raw words, the confessions behind the school. Maybe I'd wanted it so badly that I tricked myself into believing the bully who tormented me could also be the boy who cared. But no, because 3 days later, I found a note stuffed through the slit of my locker. Different handwriting this time. Jagged, scrawled like a knife had carved it into the page. Faggots like "you should stay away from him."
No signature.
No need. The venom in those words was enough to tell me someone had noticed. I went cold all over, my fingers trembling as I shoved the note into my pocket. The hallway felt hostile, eyes everywhere. Though maybe that was just my paranoia. For the rest of the day, Jason didn't look at me once. And that night, lying awake in the dark, I convinced myself it was over. That whatever fragile, impossible thing had existed between us was gone. That maybe it had never really been there to begin with. Except the next morning, there was another note. This one in Jason's messy scrawl.
"I'm sorry."
"Don't listen to them. I don't know how to protect you. Or me. I don't know how to do this out loud." My chest ached reading it. I pressed the paper to my chest like it could fill the hollow inside me. Because it wasn't just me he was scared for. He was scared for himself too. And I understood.
God, I understood.
The tension between us grew unbearable. We'd pass each other in the halls, eyes darting anywhere but at each other, pretending we didn't know, pretending we hadn't written pieces of our souls onto lined paper. But late at night, the notes still came. Left under my doorstep, slid into the crack of my bedroom window. They weren't long. Just scraps of his heart he couldn't say out loud. "I can't stop thinking about you. I hate myself for the way I treated you. You didn't deserve it. Sometimes I wish we could just leave. Just go somewhere nobody cares. I wrote back with the same desperation. My words were clumsy, messy, but they were mine. And slowly, those scraps of paper became the only place we were real. The first time we touched without anger between us, it was almost by accident. We were in the library, tucked between the shelves at the far back where no one ever went. He'd slipped me a note earlier that day asking me to meet him there after last period. When I arrived, he looked exhausted, like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. His hair was damp with sweat from practice, and his hands fidgeted at his sides. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered. My heart sank. Doing what? Hiding like this, pretending like you don't mean anything when you do. And then, before I could say anything, his hand brushed mine. Just lightly, just enough to make my breath hitch. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't a taunt. It was a question. And against every instinct screaming at me about how dangerous this was, I didn't pull away. Our fingers hooked together, tentative and trembling. And in that silent aisle of the library, I swear it felt louder than the roar of the Friday night crowd. For a moment, the world felt impossibly kind. But the world has sharp edges, and secrets like ours have a way of cutting deep. Because someone saw. I didn't notice at first, the quick flash of movement at the end of the aisle, the soft gasp. But Jason did. His whole body went rigid, his hand snapping away from mine like we'd been burned. "Shit!" he muttered under his breath, eyes darting toward the exit. "Who was that?" I asked, heart pounding. He didn't answer. He just ran. And I was left standing there, hands still tingling where his fingers had been, terrified of what would come next. The fallout came faster than I could have imagined. By the next morning, the whispers in the hall weren't just about me anymore. They were about him, about us. I caught fragments as I moved between classes. Snatches of cruel laughter, muttered words that pierced like glass. "Did you hear? No way, not Jason. Figures. Look who he's been hanging around with." My chest tightened with every passing conversation. And when I finally saw Jason, the look on his face told me everything. He wasn't grinning. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't even looking at me. He just walked with his head down, fists clenched, jaw tight like if he opened his mouth the whole world would spill out. That afternoon, he cornered me behind the gym. His voice was harsh, urgent. "We can't talk anymore. Not here. Not now." I flinched at the coldness in his tone. It felt like being shoved against a locker all over again. "What are you saying?" I asked, my throat tight. "I'm saying it's too dangerous. For both of us. People are already talking." His eyes darted around, scanning for anyone who might overhear. "So what? You're just gonna pretend none of this happened?" His face twisted, pain flickering through his features. "I don't want to pretend. But if I don't..." He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what it'll do to me, to my family, to the team, to everything." The words landed like stones in my stomach. "So you'd rather let them keep thinking I'm just the kid you shoved into lockers? That I was never anything more than that to you?" His eyes finally met mine, raw and desperate. "I'd rather let them think I'm a monster than risk them knowing the truth." And then he walked away. That night I cried harder than I ever had before. Not just because of him, but because I knew exactly why he was doing it. Fear. The same fear that had kept me quiet my whole life. The same fear that made me rehearse my voice, my walk, my smile. The same fear that made me shrink myself smaller every single day. Jason wasn't choosing against me. He was choosing survival. And I couldn't even hate him for it. But fate has a cruel way of forcing truths into the open. A week later, it happened. I was at my locker, pulling out a book, when a voice sneered from behind me. "Hey, Fairy, how's your boyfriend?" The hallway erupted with laughter. I froze, blood rushing to my ears. Slowly I turned, and there he was, one of Jason's teammates, tall, broad, and grinning like he just told the funniest joke in the world. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, from the end of the hall, Jason appeared. He stopped dead when he saw the scene, the teammates sneering at me, the crowd of kids watching, me standing there paralyzed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then Jason stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. In 3 long strides, he was in front of me. And instead of shoving me against the locker like he used to, he did something that silenced the whole hallway. He put his hand on my shoulder. A simple touch. A small gesture. But in that moment, it was louder than a confession shouted from the rooftops. His teammates' grin faltered. The laughter around us stuttered into silence. Jason's voice, when it finally came, was steady, firm. "Don't talk about him like that." The words hit harder than any punch could have. His teammate blinked, confused. "What? Dude, I said don't." Jason's tone was sharp enough to cut steel. And for the first time, I realized something. He wasn't just standing up for me. He was standing up to himself, too. To every cruel word he'd ever thrown at me. The teammate muttered something under his breath and backed off. The crowd began to scatter, the moment dissolving into the usual hum of hallway noise. But for me, the world had shifted on its axis. Because Jason hadn't just protected me. He'd chosen me, in front of everyone. Later that day, we met again behind the gym, the same place he'd told me we couldn't talk anymore. This time, his hands weren't clenched. They were trembling. "I couldn't let him say that," he whispered. "Not about you. Not when it's true." My breath caught. "What's true?" His eyes searched mine, desperate, scared, but also something else, hopeful. "That I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone." The words hung in the air, fragile and precious. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a secret. But high school isn't kind to love like ours. And what came next would test us both in ways neither of us was ready for. Because once the rumor mill starts, it doesn't stop. And the hardest part of our story wasn't the cruelty of others. It was learning how to forgive each other, how to heal from the years of pain, and how to believe that love could grow in the same place where hate once lived. If I told you the rest was easy, I'd be lying. The moment Jason put his hand on my shoulder in that hallway, we crossed an invisible line we couldn't retreat from. The whispers that had once been vague became sharper, bolder. We weren't just rumors anymore, we were targets. By the end of the week, everyone seemed to know. Or at least everyone thought they did. Some laughed, some sneered, some just stared. It was like walking through a world made of glass. Every step fragile, every breath loud enough to shatter. And Jason, who had spent years building an image of perfection, was suddenly at the center of it all. The golden boy had cracks in his armor, and people noticed. One night he showed up at my house. I heard the tap of pebbles against my window, like some cliché from a teenage romance movie. Except when I pushed the curtain aside, I saw him standing there in the dark with his hoodie pulled low. His shoulders hunched like the weight of the world was pressing him into the dirt. I crept downstairs and let him in through the back door. The second he stepped inside, the mask fell. His eyes were red, his jaw trembling. "They won't stop," he whispered. His voice cracked on the words. "The guys on the team, the things they're saying, the way they look at me now." I swallowed hard. "What did you expect, Jason? That they'd just accept it? That they wouldn't care?" His hands fisted in his hoodie. "I don't know what I expected. I didn't think it would hurt this much." For a long moment, we stood in silence, the kitchen dimly lit by the hum of the refrigerator. Then, without warning, he crumpled. Shoulders shaking, breaths ragged. He buried his face in his hands. I'd seen Jason angry. I'd seen him cruel. I'd even seen him vulnerable, in the scrawled notes he'd written me. But I had never seen him like this, completely undone. I stepped forward, hesitated for just a second, then wrapped my arms around him. He didn't resist. He leaned into me, trembling, and for the first time, I felt how heavy he was, not physically, but in the way his whole life had been built on pretending. And now that facade was cracking. We sat on the kitchen floor that night, leaning against the cabinets, our knees pulled up, our hands tangled together like we were anchoring each other. He whispered things he'd never said out loud before, about the pressure from his dad, who lived vicariously through every touchdown and victory. About the way he laughed along with his friends when they made jokes about people like us, even though every word felt like a knife. about how he hated himself for the years he spent making me his target, just to distract everyone, including himself, from the truth. And I told him things I'd never said either. How lonely it felt to always be watching from the edges. How every day was a performance. How sometimes I wondered if maybe it would be easier if I just stopped existing altogether. The words hung between us, raw and ugly, but somehow freeing. Because for the first time, neither of us was hiding. But the world outside my kitchen didn't change overnight. Jason's teammates started leaving him out, ignoring him in the locker room, cutting him from conversations. The coach benched him once, claiming it was about focus. But everyone knew better. And me? The stares followed me everywhere. A few brave kids even spat slurs as I walked past, words that stuck like tar in my chest. But there were other moments, too. Quiet ones. Like the girl from my art class who slipped me a note that said, "I think you're really brave." Or the boy 2 grades below me who found me in the library and whispered, "Thank you for not hiding." Those moments didn't erase the pain, but they reminded me we weren't as alone as we thought. The hardest part, though, wasn't the whispers or the rumors. It was learning to forgive, because every time Jason held my hand, every time he brushed his fingers over mine, every time his eyes softened in a way they never had before, there was still a shadow inside me that remembered. The shoves, the laughter, the cruel words. One night I finally said it out loud. "You hurt me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You made my life hell. And sometimes, when I look at you, I still see that boy. The one who shoved me into lockers. The one who made me hate myself even more than I already did." Jason's face crumpled. His voice broke. "I know. And I hate that version of me, too. I can't take it back. But if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Tears burned in my eyes, because part of me wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. And the other part, the part that had survived years of his cruelty, was terrified to let him in. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's not some magic key that unlocks the past. It's a choice, over and over again, to believe that people can change, to believe that love can grow in the cracks left by pain. And slowly, achingly, painfully slowly, I began to choose it. Because when Jason kissed me for the first time, soft, hesitant, tasting like salt from both our tears, I realized something. For all the years he'd pushed me away, what we had now wasn't built on cruelty. It was built on survival, on scars, on the pieces of ourselves we finally stopped hiding. And maybe, just maybe, that was stronger than anything that had come before. Our first kiss should have felt like a victory, like a moment of triumph after everything we'd endured. But instead, it felt fragile, like something that could shatter if we breathed too hard. We pulled away, both of us trembling. His forehead rested against mine, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "Was that okay?" Jason whispered. My throat was too tight to answer at first. Finally, I managed a shaky, "Yeah, more than okay." But deep inside, I knew it wasn't going to be simple. Nothing about us ever was. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of heaven and hell. He'd walk past me in the halls, our eyes locking for the briefest second, and it was enough to make my heart race for hours. He'd slip notes into my locker, now folded into neat squares instead of the hurried scraps they used to be, each one a quiet reminder that he was still there, still choosing me. But then came the other side, the whispers, the taunts, the way teachers looked away when someone spat a slur, pretending they hadn't heard. Once, someone shoved me in the cafeteria line hard enough that my tray clattered to the floor. Laughter rippled through the room, and when I glanced up, Jason was there, watching, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. But he didn't move. Later, when I asked him why, his voice cracked. "If I'd stepped in, it would have made it worse for you. For us. I'm trying to protect you." I wanted to scream that silence wasn't protection. That watching me get humiliated while he stayed frozen was another kind of cruelty. But instead, I just nodded. Because I understood the fear that kept him still. And maybe I was just as guilty of it as he was. The turning point came one night after a game. It was late, the field empty except for the glow of the floodlights. Jason had played well, but instead of celebrating with his teammates, he'd slipped away, motioning for me to follow. We ended up sitting on the bleachers, the metal cold beneath us, the night sky stretched wide above. For a long while we said nothing, just sat there, breathing in sync, the silence heavy with everything we couldn't say. Finally, Jason spoke. "I don't know how to be both," he whispered. "Both what?" I asked. "Both the guy everyone thinks I am and the guy I actually am. I feel like I'm split in half, and no matter which side I choose, I'm gonna lose something." I stared at him, the boy who had once been my tormentor, now unraveling before me. "You don't have to be both," I said softly. "You just have to be you." His laugh was bitter. "And who is that, exactly? The asshole who shoved you into lockers? Or the coward who couldn't even defend you today?" My chest ached.
No.
"You're the boy who wrote me notes when he didn't know how to speak. You're the boy who's trying, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. That's who you are." For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then, with a shaky breath, he reached for my hand. And this time he didn't pull away. From that night on, something shifted. He started showing up differently. Maybe not all at once, maybe not loudly, but enough. He sat with me at lunch even when it meant enduring the stares. He defended me in small, subtle ways that most people didn't even notice. And slowly, painfully, the school stopped buzzing as loudly about us. Not because they accepted us, but because gossip only lasts as long as people feed it. And Jason stopped feeding it. But healing isn't linear. There were nights he broke down in my arms, convinced he was ruining both our lives. Nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a mistake, if trusting him meant setting myself up to be hurt all over again. And there were days when the weight of what we'd been, bully and victim, sat heavy between us, an invisible wall we had to keep tearing down piece by piece. But through it all, one thing remained. We kept choosing each other. Through the fear, through the shame, through the scars we'd both left on each other. We chose. Looking back now, I think that's what saved us. Not some grand declaration. Not a magical moment where everything suddenly became easy. Just the quiet, stubborn act of choosing again and again. Choosing to forgive. Choosing to try. Choosing to love, even when it hurt. Because love isn't about erasing the past. It's about building something stronger in spite of it. And somehow, against all odds, the boy who once shoved me into lockers became the boy who slipped love notes into my pocket. The boy who kissed me under the bleachers. The boy who eventually stood beside me without flinching. My bully became my boyfriend. And though our story was messy, jagged, stitched together with pain and apology, it was ours. And it taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes, the person who breaks you is also the one who helps you put yourself back together.